Wallace Chan is a genius. Himself a treasure, he's creating some of the most beautiful jewelry being designed and fabricated today. What amazes me most about his work is that he does it all. At this point in his career, of course, he has a staff, but Mr. Chan's brilliance, in part, lies in his ability to dream something up, cut the gemstone, work the metal, and create the finished jewel. This is an unusual thing in an industry where artisans typically do specialized work. An innovator, his natural curiosity has led him to create new gemstone cuts and pioneer work in materials like titanium. Sometimes this has meant spending months studying unrelated industries to find the right tool. As you'll hear today, Mr. Chan is patient, inquisitive, and dedicated, spending whatever time he needs to truly understand the materials and then pushing the boundaries. With a practical understanding of his art at every level, he makes the impossible possible. His work will no doubt have a lasting impact on the jeweler's art. Butterflies, insects, fish, flowers. Chan is a genius and an innovator, but his jewelry is also beautiful. At the same time, his designs are a contradiction, delicate and painterly and bold and avant-garde. I first heard about the work of Wallace Chan a few years ago when a friend, who's also a stone carver, sent me an email with images and information about the Wallace cut. When Wallace Chan Dream Light Color came out earlier this year, I immediately bought a copy and spent hours studying the designs and details of his work. 4 months later, at the European Fine Art Fair in the Netherlands, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Chan and seeing his jewelry in person. I can tell you that pictures, no matter how good they are, and the book has really remarkable pictures, don't do Mr. Chan's extraordinary work justice. Last September, Anthony DeMarco did a feature on Wallace Chan for Forbes magazine, and in it he paid him a great compliment, saying that Chan is recognized by many as the greatest living Asian jewelry artist. In 2012, Chan was the first Asian jeweler invited to the Biennale in Paris, and since then, he's been working tirelessly to share his work with a global audience at international art fairs. Late last year, Francois Curiel, the chairman of Christie's Asia Pacific, told the New York Times that Chan was a Renaissance man in the best sense of the word, a scientist, designer, sculptor, a visionary. I couldn't agree more. Please join me in welcoming Wallace Chan.
當我要做創作嘅時候，我要睇到一個寶石，我就會匿埋眼咧去冥想。當你要學習光嘅時候咧，你就要將自己變成一個光，進入一個寶石嘅世界。你好似自己係消失咗，會教你點樣去切割呢個寶石。我哋4個兄弟姊妹咧食飯嘅時候咧，係用一個匙羹㗎。我覺得咧係喺呢個環境裏邊咧，先至可以成就今日嘅。個原因咧，因為當時唔夠飯食，屋企住得唔溫暖，所以不停咧有夢想。如果我哋用傳統嘅技術、傳統嘅工藝，冇創新性，我會覺得你仲係活喺過去裏邊。但係能夠證實咗而家。
But now we have proved that modernity is about technology.
工藝上邊咧，要表達內在世界咧，所知道嘅知識咧，係比其他嘅係困難好多。嘅原因咧，你要懂得寶石學，懂得工藝，懂得人體工學，懂得雙石嘅技術，懂得冶金咁呢啲等等嘅技術咧，要混埋一齊，仲要咧知道佢嗰個同人體嗰個溝通能唔能夠產生共鳴。珠寶嘅創作對我嚟講咧，係一種經驗，係一種人生嘅一種體會，亦都係藉著呢個珠寶作為一種傳承嘅一個載體。呢個就係我要表達嘅目的。如果你要問我係乜嘢嘅時候，我只可以話咧，我係一個咧對知識、對學問咧一個好貪心嘅人，不停咁樣咧去探討同埋去學習。但係咧，呢啲我由細到大咧，都係有咁嘅好奇。我諗最後剩翻嗰3口氣，可能我都係諗住創作。
Book opens with a quote that says, "I want to transform my dreams into beautiful feather-like jewels that capture the light and tell their stories. They create messages of the past to become the heritage of the future." I'm curious how your own history impacts your work. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood in Hong Kong and what you were like as a boy?
點解冇翻譯嘅？聽唔到翻譯㗎？
I would like to thank everyone. I would like to thank my good friends, my teacher, to take the time out of your very, very busy schedules to come here. And in the remaining time, I will reflect my inner feelings to you all. I can say when I was 5 years old, I have immigrated to Hong Kong at the age of 5 years old. I grew up in an environment of curiosity. When I first arrived in Hong Kong, I did not understand Cantonese, the local dialect here, and I went to a few schools trying to enroll in these schools, but I didn't even know what the teachers were talking about, and I didn't even know how to fill in the forms or where to put my name, Wallace Chan, on. And every day in my home, I would see the electric plug being plugged in. And when it's plugged in, the appliances work. The radio worked, and and it seemed that the fan needn't stop, needn't rest, nor the radio. How come once it's been plugged in, it would work? And I unplugged the fan and put my thumb in, and then my forefinger to insert into the electric socket, but that didn't work. The fan didn't work. And finally, I tried the chopstick, and then I tried the weaving needle, or the knitting needle of my mother. And of course, I got a very big an electrocuted needle. And I was thinking to myself, how do I explain this to my mother? Well, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I started making plastic flowers at home, still at home. And because I was not tall enough, my father helped me with various things because I was too short, and he gave me boxes, crates that carried soft drinks, so that I could stand on them as platforms and work on the table. because I didn't have any education, I didn't go to school, I was all the more curious about books, and therefore I went to these second-hand bookstores that were along the streets. But if I didn't buy, and which I did not, I was shooed away very often. I didn't recognize the words, but I wanted to flip through the pages. I therefore had been very curious, and I've been thirsty, hungry for books all these years.
How did you come to apprentice as a stone carver?
到16歲嘅時，
When I turned 16, the uncles and my father's friends said to my father, now Wallace is already 16 years old. If he has no skill, how can he be successful in society or make a living? And at the time, I had two possibilities, two choices open to me. One was to become a gemstone carving apprentice, or to join my father's friend's garage, but because my mother didn't like washing dirty clothes, and therefore I chose the former. And that was when I started my path with gemstones. At the time, I was carving different gemstones, white jade, coral, etc.
Types of things that you carved as an apprentice and what your days were like?
In 1973, because President Nixon had just paid a visit to China, the first diplomatic visit for a long time, and therefore there was a crave for Chinese handicraft. And therefore, at the time, anything that's Chinese handicrafts were very popular. And therefore, our themes, they were of Chinese motif, and they were about the lucky signs in Chinese. For example, the vase, the flower vase, which has a homophone with peace, and those motifs were used. And also, there were works with Chinese beliefs and ways of lives and religion. And I remember at the time it was all skill-based, but in November of 1973, China opened up for the first time in the sense that it came up with ceramics, porcelain, and ivory, and embroidery, and they were displayed in Hong Kong, in Tsim Sha Tsui, actually, in Hong Kong. And I remember queuing up for over 2-3 hours in order to get into the venue. And I remember being struck at the time by an ivory carving. And I remember it was the moon fairy flying up to the moon. That was the theme of the carving. And I thought to myself, how long will it take me to do something like this? And at the time, I thought if I needed to live like 10 years shorter, I would still be able to exchange for that skill.
Exhibition that showed ivory carving. Were you carving ivory in the studio you were apprenticing in?
At the time, no, not yet. I was not carving ivory. But a lot of gemstone carvers, masters, they came from the ivory or wood carving trade. Yes, that was the situation then. I've never thought of it that way, that I'm talented. I remember I started my education when I was pretty old, and in primary 2, the teacher said in front of everyone, she said, Wallace is the stupidest student I've ever had. He will have no future. And then in later years, a lot of people tell me I'm talented. And I think the only thing that distinguishes me from other people is that before other people report to work, go to the office or the factory, I'm already there. And when everybody's gotten off work, I'm still there in the workplace. looking at the results of work of my peers and co-workers, looking at their works, I would say my talent is hardworking. That's my talent.
I would agree with you. What were these carvings used for that you were making early on in your career?
At the time, the carvings were built on motifs of well-being, being fortunate, and that is the homophone that I was referring to. Some companies outside of their entrance would place a huge flower vase with a homophone of peace to signify peace in coming and going out of the company's entrance. And the elephant would symbolize peace also in the world. And apart from these, there were, we can see this particular one, which is the bat, and there is a gold coin. These two put together means that the sense of well-being is inside of you. You don't have to look outwards. And in the middle, you see an egret. It means peace and well-being all the way, because the egret homophone is the path, going onto the path. And on the right are two fish, and especially in the Chinese New Year time, there would be carvings and drawings of fish to be presented as gifts for economic well-being. And also, there are other paintings and carvings to symbolize feng shui and fortune and well-being.
When did you become aware of Western carving?
After 9 months of following and learning from my master, and as I said, in November 1973, I went to that expo, which was presented by China Mainland. I felt that the learning that I was undertaking and what I saw had a very big distance between each other. And I decided there and then to leave my master and go back home. But then at home, there was no space to do what I wanted to do. And therefore, I went to the hallway, actually outside of my kitchen in my home. And while everybody was at work, I would put a small table outside and start doing my carving work. And when everybody came back home in the evening, I would move the small table back to my house again. In the beginning, I would carve non-translucent or opaque gemstones, and that would include malachite and coral and white jade. And then I wanted very much to leave the tradition base. The traditional base was in wood, and I wanted to use other stones and materials such as copper, silver to use as the base. And therefore, I started my interest in delving into the metals, such as gold and silver. And then there was another stage in my career, and that is working on transparent gemstones. They would include crystals and amethysts. And that was when I first came into contact with Western carving skills, and also Western mythology. I was really interested at the time, and I started to make small Westernized carvings. And some customers wanted me to also go into wearable gemstones, and that was when I started creating the Wallace cut. The third stage in my career was the Great Stupa, which I created. And it was a turning point in my life. Starting from then, I have started this spiritual carving or spiritual themed carving. And for metallurgy, titanium, and other metals, I became more and more interested, and I put in a lot of energy in studying them. Even now, I'm looking for new materials.
You mentioned to me that you had come across a book of drawings or of images of work by Michelangelo, and that had really inspired your work for a period. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Because I didn't have an education, I was therefore very curious about books. And in particular, when I came across bookstores, especially large ones, I found them like shrines, and they were so unreachable. And I have been passing by a bookstore, and I've been very curious as to what the books talked about in that bookstore. And finally, because of accumulation of curiosity, overcoming my sense of inability and shyness, I went inside. I went around the bookstore, but I didn't know what book to pick up. But all of a sudden, something caught my eye, a book. Because in my school days, N and M were undistinguishable for me. And the first letter for that book was an M, the letter M. And I took the book up and I saw carvings of alabaster, of stone, and I felt that the stone sculpture was still breathing and it was talking to me, that I needed to learn from it. And I paged through the book, and I saw paintings in that book. How come a finger would point to another finger almost touching? And why were there all these architecture, the churches, the insides of the churches, the steeples? And then I found out that it was Michelangelo's work. I became very interested in Greek mythology and also carvings, Western style.
I'd like to talk more about the details of your artistic process, but first I'm curious to know how you classify yourself. With skills as a stone carver, who's pioneered new cuts, and more recently as a metal worker using innovative materials like titanium, and someone who designs and makes jewelry, among other things. Do you think of yourself as a jeweler, an artist, or a magician, maybe?
I've never been able to define myself or try to define myself, but every day I use all my efforts to look for something new. And every night when I sleep, I go into a state of reincarnation. And when I wake in the morning, even if I am looking at the same ceiling, I would think that it is different. And there are new colors that I see on the ceiling. And there are reliefs on the ceilings. And you can say that this is imagination, or you can say that I've lost my mind, but I really feel that in my senses. And through observation, I am communicating with the cosmos.
Your work is so masterfully done. There does seem to be a dreamlike quality to it. One of the achievements that you were celebrated for early on was the Wallace cut. We have seen this featured on BBC and CNN. CNN described how this disembodied head, which seems to have a life of his own, was spirited into the gem. Seems to be something of a mystery. Can you tell us more about the Wallace cut and how it was different from other stone cutting techniques used in the 1980s?
In 1987, I came up with the Wallace cut. Before then, gemstone cutting was gemstone cutting, and that is the cut is a cut, and that is using the traditional way for doing the gemstone cutting to show the colors and the light of the gemstone. And basically, with the Wallace cut, it is taking off what is not needed, the forms that is not wanted, and to leave what is to be retained. It is about a spirit, it is about a carving culture and culture. So it is more about culture. I have been able to, in fact, merge the two. That is to say, for light and gemstone and carving, I have put them into one, and through calculations, I've come up with a Wallace cut.
I had the opportunity to handle one of your Wallace cut gemstones, and while you see 5 faces on the front of the gem, when you turn it over, there's just one face carved into the back, and I found that to be surprising. It seems to me like there's a lot of technical skill and mathematics involved in creating the Wallace cut. Can you walk us through the process of inventing this new stone cutting technique?
From the front, you're able to see 5 faces, but in fact, I have carved only one face, and that is through very accurate calculation, very precise and calculation, and also faceting to create these reflections. I have started with the carving on this gemstone, but again, it will have to be merged with a thinking, a reverse carving motion, and a kind of reverse thinking. However, for the knives that we have per minute, it is actually a dental drill that I'm using. It is 36,000 rotations per minute, and as a result, the high heat generated would crack the stone, and therefore to complete the work, the carving in water. However, the powder from the carving would actually make the water murky, and therefore I will have to carve, take the gemstone up, blow it dry, and then immerse it in water again and start carving again. So what has to be left becomes right, right becomes left. So that's what I mean by reverse technique. And I was able to attain a state where my heart, my eyes, my hands, and the tool are one. And the gem becomes my skin. And I'm able to, in the water, carve for 2 minutes, 3 minutes before I take the gemstone up to check it. And I'm sorry.
Done about the Wallace cut gemstone. Maybe we should take a look.
Everything in the universe is nurtured by the generosity of Mother Nature. Everything is beautiful. And the power and beauty created by Mother Nature is beyond our imagination.
I'm Wallace Chan. I am jewelry creator.
In 1973, I started as an apprentice for sculpture in a family-based workshop. After that, I taught myself and explored the world on my own, and I started to learn about diamond cutting. I learned that when light enters the diamond, the reflections and colors interact with each other and create different effects. In 1987, I invented this Wallace cut inside a gemstone. I only carved one figure, but because of the gemstone cutting and the light, it appears as 4 sides. This piece was inspired by the Greek goddess Hore, who was in charge of the 4 seasons. So I have created one figure that can be reflected on 4 sides.
蓝宝呢是来自
This
斯里兰
purple sapphire comes from Sri Lanka and is 164 carats. It's the largest and fullest purple sapphire in the world.
因为它是
Because the purple here stands for nobility, wisdom, and power.
力量的象征。 好像这个蚂蚁
This ant on my shoulder. Why did I make it? It's because I know that the ant can lift up something 100 times more than its own weight. I have been working on different kinds of metals, and I could not find a metal that could do the same thing as the ant.
但是呢，在1000多年前呢，在
In
中国
China, more than 1,000 years ago, there was a story called The Butterfly Lovers.
它就把
It talked about how two persons were very much in love. They loved each other so much that when they died, they became butterflies.
所以呢，蝴蝶是
Today in China, the butterflies have become a symbol of love.
但是用所有的
But no matter what gemstones you use, it is very difficult to convey the colors of the butterflies.
蝴蝶作为
So I used the wings of a butterfly for my butterfly brooch.
我呢每天充满了感恩，
I feel grateful every day because the history accumulated from the past is helping us make things happen today. The technology, the craftsmanship, the knowledge left for us from our ancestors have become our foundation today. I hope my jewelry pieces can also become another kind of education for our next generations.
It sounds like materials really influence and inform your artistic process. You've said that light is the key to the secret of each gemstone. Light is an essential element of your work, both the light weight of your jewelry and the way light reflects off your gemstones. Can you tell us more about this affinity that you have towards light and towards gemstones?
There are 3 stages in the life of a piece of jewelry. The first one is that of the gemstone. The second is that of craftsmanship. The third is creativity and culture. And all 3 need light. In the first stage of its life, the gemstone will have light moving on it, and at that time it is an external light. We only look at the light traveling on the surface of the stone. And when the light penetrates into the gemstone, into the body of the gemstone, we will be able to see the light inside the body of the gem, how it reflects on the color within the gemstone. And then we can decide what kind of form the gemstone will take, how to cut it. And here, craftsmanship is very important. Light is very important for craftsmanship. Only with light will you be able to see what you usually would not be able to see in the gemstone, its form, its possibilities. So light is a catalyst, and especially through laser, in the modern day, it is very focused, concentrated, and in a very small space there can be welding in a very minute dimension. And this creativity and culture will continue with knowledge, with technology, with more attainment. There will also be further light, internal light. The Wallace cut, for instance, in its creation, on the basis of the ordinary tools, it would not be attainable. Without the proper tools, one has to look for them. And if you cannot find the tools, you have to make the tools. If you cannot make the tools, you have to make the machines which will make the tools. Where there are no methods, you have to find the methods. And it is not all done in a day. It has to be accumulated. It has to be done with a lot of efforts and time.
How has the invention of the Wallace cut changed you?
When I was studying the Wallace cut, the light was moving inside the gemstone, and I discovered that the light, well, rather, in cutting the gemstone, I deepened myself in the world of the gemstone. I would usually find a point in the gemstone. In its front, there would be this point, and this point becomes very important for me. It is an inspiration for the Wallace cut, and it stems actually from a concept that I formed many years ago when looking at photography. And I saw these multiple exposures in photography, and I thought to myself, if I can do this in carving gemstone, that would be good. But I did not want to repeatedly carve on the same gemstone, and therefore I have used different methods to finally arrive at the source of light and the relationship with carving of the gemstone, and therefore the Wallace cut.
To create innovative new ways of carving and of cutting gemstones, I imagine that you've had to think about the way the stones are set. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the settings that you use?
Gemstone setting gemstone is one way of setting, and it is a pure state. Now, first of all, I would carve this white jade, and it feels like the melting snow in the spring. And inside, the yellow diamond is like the good earth, and it is shining onto our good life. But in doing so, you have to first understand the angles for carving the diamond. And for the white jade, you have to make precise calculation for there to be a reverse relationship with the diamond, and then set the two together. And this one is another way of, this is tension setting with the two colors of the two gemstones. They affect each other in the color when they are put side by side together. But I don't want metal to come in their midst. And therefore, in the calculation and in the carving, there is a difference in the height of the gemstones. And through very precise calculation and innovation in craftsmanship, we have been able to create this piece. And also, this is a Ming dynasty furniture. 400 years ago, it was created. Basically, it doesn't need glue or one piece of nail, and it would not come apart. And this, at the time when I saw this, I thought that this is completely unbelievable. It is the mortise and tenon setting, which is traditional Chinese. And I studied the tension, the expansion of the materials, and how it can be used in gemstone setting and also in the stupa carving. And I discovered in the process that there is very limited expansion to the gemstone, and therefore I used titanium to do this mortise setting, because the titanium has a memory. It is more ideal.
There is a dialectic between tradition and innovation in your work. Similarly, you use jade, a traditional stone in China, but you use it in innovative, unexpected ways. Can you tell me about the meaning that jade has in China and also its meaning to you personally?
Jade, the character of jade in the creation of the character in traditional Chinese, it is already in itself very meaningful. Now, this is how you write jade in Chinese. There is a first horizontal stroke, which is the sky, I think, and in the middle there is earth and also human, the last stroke. And you are able to penetrate all three. When you penetrate all three, you will have supreme wisdom, and that is the king. And if you put a dot there, it becomes a character jade. So you can see the kind of emotions imbued in this character.
Traditional Chinese carving features elements of folklore and auspicious symbols, but your work translates Eastern iconography in a way that appeals to a global audience. Here, we're looking at still life, a brooch in the form of a cicada. This is perhaps one of your best-known ornaments. Can you tell us about the significance of the cicada?
Cicada in Chinese history has over 5,000 years of history. It symbolizes a lot of things. For example, reincarnation, speedy reincarnation, nobleness, and because the cicada eats and drinks dewdrops, and therefore the literary would use this as a vehicle for their poetry and compositions. And very often, when people pass away in traditional Chinese, people would put a jade cicada inside the mouth of the dead person to signify that there will be rapid or fast reincarnation and also wisdom for the coming life. And when babies are born, a cicada will be given to the baby to signify a rich life ahead. So the jade cicada had always been an important feature in Chinese history and culture. And today, I would want to use this jade to carve the cicada to attract more attention to this traditional item.
Very large brooch. I'm transfixed by the scale of your work. Because the jewelry is so large, it functions as both a sculpture and an object of adornment, something that's meant to be worn. Can you tell us a little bit about how you balance the physical attributes of the piece, for example here, this very lifelike cicada, with the needs of the wearer?
In my process of creation, I would put every piece in my mind as I would think of it as a mini architecture for each and every piece, because it is the vehicle. The architecture is a vehicle. The gemstone is also a vehicle. The architecture is a structural vehicle. The gemstone is the vehicle for emotions and culture, and I would spin the two together into a piece of work. And when I've completed the piece of work, if it cannot be worn, then it doesn't, and it is meaningless as a piece of jewelry. And therefore, I will start from the micro world, micro view, to go into the macro to see whether at the end of the creative process, whether it's wearable, and gravity, comfort, and ergonomics come into play.
For the last 9 months, you've been participating in art fairs all over the world, and to display works like this, you created these very theatrical vignettes. For the cicada, you made a branch for it to perch on. What is your vision for how your jewelry should be displayed and worn?
I think for each piece of creation, when it is presented to the public, to people, it is an exchange. And the cicada, when it is presented or exhibited, it is not just about the work itself, the piece itself, but rather there's an interplay with the light, even with the lighting, for instance.
A spider hanging from the bamboo.
The spider spins the web to catch its prey, and the cicada is one of its preys. But here I have the cicada which is playing a joke on the spider, because you see, if you pull on the cicada, or rather, if you pull on the spider, the cicada can be extracted. You can take it away. So that is to say, an escape.
There seems to be a deep respect for nature in Chinese culture, which is connected to Zen philosophy. I read an article about you in The Economist that described that the jewels you make are delicate and deeply reflect Zen Buddhist philosophy. Can you tell us about how nature and Zen combine in your work?
China had built the country from agriculture, and therefore nature is very important in the hearts of the Chinese. Chinese people, before they go into a temple to worship the gods, they would first worship the sky and then the good earth. And in my creation, this is also what I do. It is part of this tradition.
I mentioned earlier that your work has an element of magic. The dreamlike quality really comes to life in The Secret Abyss. This pendant and necklace seamlessly combine your work as a creator and a technical genius. With your artistic philosophy, where did this idea come from?
Before I talk about The Secret Abyss, I would want to talk a little bit more about the Zen and nature. When I was very small, I saw butterflies, and I didn't know the butterfly, and I asked my mother, why are these colors flying? And now, what I see, what's flying, I don't see them as butterflies. I still see them as flying colors, because what I see is sunlight, lighting, and the interplay of the wings with the air and sunlight. And therefore, I see the form, the lines, and I see it as vibration of sounds and light. And I would go back to my workplace. I would use a basin of water. I blow the basin of water with a hair dryer, and I would study the waves that is created, and I use this on the wings of the butterflies that I create. The color and also the interplay between the air and the sunlight and the wings. And now, if I can go back to your question about The Secret Abyss, when I was small, I went to a magic show. No, actually, I saw it on TV. And the magician was tied up, the arms, and he was dumped into a transparent box. And after that, he was placed into a water closet, a huge body of water. And he extricated himself and was able to extract himself and escape. And I found that really shocking. And it's been in my heart, that scene, for a long number of years. And I thought to myself, when can I transform this into a piece of jewelry? And finally, I used crystal to attempt to reflect this experience. And I looked into the skills and the craftsmanship, and it was over 10 years, and I have broken dozens of pieces of crystals. And finally, I was able to drill a hole of 6.5 millimeters. And in that very small hole, I was able to set 1-carat round diamonds, a large number of them. And so this is, there is space to move around inside that stone. The 6.5 millimeters is where my spirit goes in and where my spirit comes out.
Weight. The lightness is made possible by your pioneering use of titanium. You're among the first to use titanium in jewelry. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to this material?
Technology and science continually push on and also raises the quality of our lives. Titanium is 5 times lighter than gold. This metal I chanced upon actually when I was reading the newspapers, and I found that titanium has become part of our bodies in some cases, in dental, in coronary works, such as the setting for teeth. And then for the silver and the gold that I use in my jewelry seem to be overly heavy, and therefore I looked into the possibilities of titanium. Its melting point is 1,700 degrees, but if you use a naked fire on it, it does not actually melt, because when you reach that temperature, with more and more, with oxygen playing, interacting with it, it becomes powder. So what you need to do is to treat it like a baby. Slowly, slowly you cure it. And it was through 7 years' time that I resolved this problem of using titanium. But very lately, I have created this 2.2 meters high titanium flower. It is 1.5 millimeters thick. There can be no mold used for this creation, only through setting, hammering, and carving, so the most basic technology.
With other metals.
Titanium has 10 times the memory of gold. It is malleable, and therefore it is 70% smaller in terms of the claws compared to gold claws, and therefore the light can more easily pass into the gemstone, and therefore the reflection would be stronger for the gems.
Has it allowed you to do things that traditional metals like gold and platinum haven't?
Titanium, its strength is stronger than gold, and it is multicolored, and that is something that gold cannot attain.
So while you work in Hong Kong and your studio is here, the reason for our conversation today is your book. Last year you published an impressive monograph of your work. Can you tell us what this means to you?
From small, I was not able to come across too many books, and therefore I have always hungered for books. I couldn't afford the books, I didn't go to school much, and to be able to publish this book had always been a cherished wish of mine. From conception to completion to publication, I've used 7 years. In these 7 years, there had been a number of very surprising problems that I had to overcome. And through photography, used in this book, I want to be able to reveal some of the micro worlds that you cannot see with the naked eye. I hope through this book you'll be able to access this micro world of gems and jewelry. It is also my answer to our culture, because for the book, which is the same as jewelry, it is the vehicle for culture and for emotions.
Looks like we're having a technical.
For emotions, and I see. Screen.
因為可能我講嘢跳嚟跳去咧，就跟唔上。
Mr. Chan was saying, is it because the screen couldn't catch up with his answers, which had been jumping around? Not at all, no.
While we're waiting for the next image, I can ask you my next question. You told me that when you're away from your studio, you're like a fish out of water. But over the last year, you spent a lot of time out of your studio as you've worked to promote your book and share your work with a wider audience. You've exhibited in the United States, Europe, the United Kingdom, and here at home. What have these experiences taught you?
Yes, the screen should show another piece. And I remember I was at the Red Square in Moscow, and I saw the architecture there, and I found it very, very impactful. And leaving my studio, I felt that I was like a fish, leaving the water, no life. But at the same time, I very much wanted to go back to my workplace and to carry on the work again. So I took that feeling of mine and I took it back to my studio, and I engraved the Kremlin castle, the Kremlin, onto the fish belly. And this has become a process in my creation.
Seems to be overwhelmingly positive. In a Reuters article, I read a statement from one of the viewers in your booth who said, "This is where jewelry meets art at the highest level." Do you agree?
I would think that art and carving and gemstone are three different paths or lines, separate lines. For most people, it's like that. But for me, anything can be used and can be looked at or studied through the lens of art. In my heart, art and everything else in the world are different points, dots, countless dots. And these dots continue to crisscross each other in our hearts, in our minds, and they weave themselves into different forms. And this is how I feel about art, the weaving of these dots.
Did you want to talk about this, your newest piece?
呢個作品呢係
This aspara was completed lately, but in fact, in my mind, I've always wanted to do this piece. The inspiration comes from Dunhuang. Dunhuang, you all know, apart from the Buddha, you would think of the Feitine, which is the Apsara. And along the Silk Road, because of the interconnection of cultures, the Apsara had changed its gender from male to female. It is now a female deity. It represents the clouds, the water, fragrance, and also music. The husband of this female deity is the divine musician. And when the divine musician, the husband, plays the music, this deity will continuously float and dance because she is born of water and clouds. She would enrich the earth so that there can be life on earth. But because this deity represents nature, the traditional deity would have these flying ribbons, these floating ribbons. And I used the clouds and water, almost like a Milky Way, to merge into this figurine of the deity. And there is a yellow diamond held by the deity representing the earth and also the sun and the earth coming together, bringing life on earth. And the Milky Way with diamonds set onto it, I also did some carving on the crystal. And they are of irregular shapes, these crystals, to symbolize time, to make the time seem longer, and it attracts the eye more when looking at this part of the sculpture.
Before we hear from the audience, a New York Times article said, referring to you, he has the curiosity, courage, and above all the talents to push boundaries artistically and geographically. He is one of the first Chinese artists to make a name in the international arena. You've established many milestones and earned your reputation as a groundbreaker. We all are very curious to know what we might see from you in the future.
All along, I've thought nature and everything had made me. When I look at the gemstone, I create. Without the gemstone, I cannot create. And traditional culture, when I learn from it, they are also nurturing me. I would feel, therefore, that nothing came from myself. Even today, my communication with you, you looking at me, our eyesight meet, these give me energy. So I am just a vehicle. Life is but an instant. It is short. I believe we have to grasp the present, make the best of the present moment.
Thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Mr. Chan, for
Hi.
your openness. I mentioned in an article, I mentioned the New York Times article a few times, and I just want to reference it again here as we get ready to close. The reporter had asked Mr. Chan about his legacy. Mr. Chan answered, "I want to leave a legacy. Chinese jewelry has a history of 6,000 years, and I want to be part of it." And in a world where so many jewelry houses are controlled by large corporations, I think Mr. Chan is a true original who has already secured his place in jewelry history. So we look forward to seeing what dreams you weave for us next. Thank you.
多謝陳先生 ，Thank you。
Now we've heard such very inspiring interchange. I'm sure you will have questions. We will have a Q&A. Before we begin the Q&A session, we will be talking about art and cultural exchange. Would you please focus your questions on these areas? Anyone, please raise your hand. That lady there.
Mr. Chan, we are all your fans. Well, when I visit the book fair, I looked at all the booths. There are so many books, and you only have one book, so I would like to ask why. Besides, in the book, there are your works being displayed. They are really symphony or orchestral work of light and dream. I would like to know where your inspirations come from, and what are the relationship between the inspirations and your heart.
先講過書係文化嘅載體，佢係藝術嘅一個象徵。咁呢本書呢，我經過咁多年，雖然用咗7年，其實呢就係我一生嘅縮影嚟㗎。咁我覺得呢，10年。
I've prepared for 7 years for the publication of this book, and I would want to use art as a medium to allow people to understand the reason for the publication of this book, the value of this book. It is about my life, all that I stand for. And titanium is like a baby. The baby is always curious about everything, hungers for everything in the world. And on the baby, I have rubies, sapphires, emeralds to symbolize the psyche of the baby. Red is about the passion, blue to symbolize a baby's little bit of sadness, and the green symbolizes a kind of peace. Thank you very much. Well, is there another question?
To hear you speak. Obviously, with regards to your book, it's a representation of your work, and for those people seeing it, they will be looking at images rather than the real thing. How was it in the process of photographing it, obviously photography being another art form, how was that relationship in being able to represent the work as truly as it could be on the page?
When I study the art of photography and to the point of publication, I have been studying the source of light. You know, a piece of paper has its own pattern, the paper itself, and it also has its own texture. It has its own form. The light, the shadow, the printing process all have their own variances. And at that level, I've been learning and learning continuously, and I so wanted myself to have all the cells in my body to be learning and to be interacting with everything in the world. And through this book, in the making of this book, I have been carrying that image in my mind, and I hope that all those who come across this book, they not only understand the value of the gemstones, but also the creativity, the craftsmanship, and also the publishing. Any other questions, please? Lady over there.
I was wondering, what would you say is the importance of technology now versus traditional techniques being used? Like, what's the impact of having the current technology that we have on the jewelry industry?
A lot of people do not like technology. When they see new technology, they would say, this is barbaric, because a lot of people lose their jobs with new technology. But I would think technology serves the humankind. As we see new technology, we should embrace it, study it, learn it. And recently, somebody's been asking me, 3D printing, how would it affect this technology? How would it affect jewelry industry? A lot of people will lose their jobs. Is that true? Well, actually, with 3D printing, a lot more people will own their own jewelry pieces, because a 3D printer would be able to print the pieces according to the way you want it, the form you want it, as you like it. And also, you'll be able to present your ideas to the one who will be receiving the piece from you as a gift. I would think in 10 years' time, the 3D printer will be prevalent. And some people think that it is a lot of people do not understand the 3D printing, and the printer, especially the material for the printing machine, is still being developed. And it will take years before it becomes prevalent. As we become more knowledgeable, we will be more wise in order to solve the problems and issues that we have. Now, the last question. Anybody, please? Greetings, Mr. Chan. You were talking about 3D printing, and before that, you were saying that we should not just look at the value of the gemstone, but also pay attention to the craftsmanship and also to the creativity. But with 3D printing, yes, there will be creativity, but what about craftsmanship? Because there is no craftsmanship to 3D printing. Well, I mentioned just now the 2.2-meter flower that I created. There was no technology in it. It was all traditional craftsmanship. Why? Because I wanted to go back to basics. With technology, yes, you can use technology or 3D printing to do things that the human hand cannot achieve. But it is still not mature, the technology, because the 3D printer is but 15 mil or 20 mil, and therefore it is still rough, the surface, and you still need to polish it. And it is different from molding. The molding involves liquidation of the metal, and all the molecules do come together. But 3D printing, with laser printing, it is particularly sensitive, and all the molecules are joined together. And therefore, with the 3D printing products that we see today, there is a sponge effect. There are holes in the product. There are these tiny holes still. Thank you, Dr. Stoehrer. Thank you, guests. We have come to the conclusion of this talk. Later, we will have a book signing session. Yes, you can queue up for the signature of Mr. Chan's, and we will have photographers here to take photographs of you together with Mr. Chan. Please leave your earphones on the chair. Yes, please do that. Thank you again for coming to this talk. Good evening to you.